Okay, so I'm just going over the Ingersoll 10 lever padlock that I want from Chris Capune. I've managed to pick it just a couple of times the first time you saw in video, and then twice since then. And I just wanted to demonstrate what it is that I'm looking for, try and explain what I'm feeling as I go through some of the picking procedure. There's no guarantee I'm going to get open today, but I found myself to be a little inconsistent on this lock. It's actually a really tricky one. But I've got the core out. I'm going to do some close-ups of the levers and what I'm feeling for and listening for when I'm picking this. So I'll get into close-up with that, hopefully get some good audio of what that sounds like, and then put it all back together and we'll do actual picking. I've got my main mic turned a little more towards this because it's quite directional, and then I've actually got a lapel mic that I'm going to clip on here. I'm going to try and record audio closer up and see how that turns out. No guarantees, but it's a fun experiment. So next thing you'll see is the close-up of the core, what I'm going through there, and then I'll put it back together and clamp it up in the vise and we'll go on picking. Okay, here's a close-up of the levers. I've got the sidebar tensioned with one of my wife's hair ties, wrapped around it several times, because I just wanted to demonstrate what you're looking for as far as a set pin. A pin that's bound will be very firm if you're using the appropriate amount of tension, which is medium heavy to heavy. A set lever will be very firm. It really won't give unless you apply quite a bit of pressure to the pick. One that's unbound, of course, is just gonna wiggle freely. It'll be fairly high up and it'll wiggle freely. One that is set will wiggle freely but through a small range, and you can hear an audible click if you listen carefully when it hits the sides of the gate, hit the sidebar. I've got an audio clip I can insert here with some of the appropriate sounds closer up because I don't think this microphone's going to pick it up. But you have light spring pressure, moves fairly freely, springing up and down, and you get a little audible click as two sides of the gate hit the sidebar. One that's not completely bound but is dragging a little bit, you want to leave alone for the most part, but you can get about the same range of motion, but again it'll be high up in its range and it's more of a dragging sensation. It's not a free wiggle. There's a little bit of drag to it, and it makes a rougher kind of grinding sound. So hopefully that kind of demonstrates a little more of what this is not completely bound, but getting about the same amount of range of motion as this one, which moves freely, but through a limited range of motion and is not fully up to the top of its unset position. So you can feel it's down and it's got a nice bit of play to it. It's very free play and you can hear the click, click, click. So in my first video, when you hear me or you see me lean in to listen, that's what I'm trying to determine is which of these is, because I had a couple that had some movement. I was trying to figure out which one was set and I needed to leave alone, which one might be unset and I need to play with. Ultimately, what you're looking for is the ones that are firm. They're not, but you'll get some that will slightly unset as you pick others. Some might pop out to the limit of their gate or slightly out of their gate, and you have to go back and touch those up. And what you'll get is you'll get something like, you might get something like this back one here. You just give it a little extra nudge and it might fall into its gate again and feel like this. But anyway, that's what the feeling and the sounds that I look for when I'm picking these. I'm going to put this back together. Okay, so I'm clamped up in the vise now. I've got out a couple of hooks here. Actually, I don't want that one. Something. It takes a heavier tension than most locks, about equivalent to what I would use or what I have used on like a commercial Schlage. When I picked this LFIC, it took a fair amount of tension to get it to bind properly. Find the same thing with this. It's about the equivalent amount. It's not super hard, but it's a pretty good amount of tension. It's hard to describe exactly. Something you kind of have to play with. You want the levers to clearly bind. You want to have enough tension on it so that when the lever hits its gate, the core can slightly turn against that O-ring to lock it in. But if you apply too much tension, the lever will take so much force to push down that A, you risk bending your picks all up, and B, it will run the risk of actually snapping past the gate and oversetting before that core can overcome the O-ring. And at least that's what I think is happening. It's before the core can move through the drag that the O-ring creates and actually set the gate down there a little better. Once it's a lever set, they're pretty well set. They can become unset while you're picking other levers. They can slightly pop out of place and you'll have to tap them again, but you don't really have to worry about oversetting them once you have them good and set in, at least in my experience on this one. This is the only one I have, so that's limited experience. So I'm going to apply, this is the thinnest wiper insert style that Sparrow sells. And I've got it in there, pulled away from that first wafer, and you can see about how much deflection I'm getting here. That's what I'm going to start with for tension. And I'm just going to work through the stack. Feel for one that just wanted to bind a little bit, which was that one. Gave me a little, but I don't think it was fully bound. Sometimes you'll have a lever that will be bound to start with, but then when you move it a little bit, it frees up. Leave it alone. That's one that will overset if you keep going with it. Once they free up, whether they're set or not, move on. Right there. It's good and firm bound. Then it went down. I felt a little movement in the tension wrench, and now I've got a little easy free movement. It's hard to make out because my pick is actually dragging on the warding a little bit. I use a pretty heavy pick. These are the cheap Chinese. They're like 28 thousandths or something. They're quite firm, but it works really well for pushing down on these levers without bending my other picks all up. Okay, it feels like the first lever on the top. Yep. Okay. Oh, I forgot to hit record on the sound. Hold on. Okay, maybe this will pick it up. That's a set lever. That one's not. That one's loose. That one's loose. Go back to the bottom. Okay, felt a little give, but I'm gonna move on because it freed up real quick. So either this just hung up a little bit, so we'll move on. And you'll see me pulse the tension after I've worked a set of levers. After each lever, usually I'll just kind of pulse the tension to try and overcome the O-ring a little more, apply a little more tension to whatever, see if the core wants to move a little bit. You can also, they will reset pretty well. I mean, as far as oversets, if you let off a little bit, you can pretty much guarantee that let off till you hear a little click, you're just bringing things out of overset. It's actually pretty predictable in that regard. Okay, got one on, I think that was 4 there, I got a little click. Front. And when I put this together, this time I actually put this end plate on the opposite of what I had it before, so now everything's backwards from the way I had it before. So it's almost like picking a different lock. Try going back to front. Okay, back up to the top. Getting a good binding now. Increase my tension. There's 4 on the top, a little click. basically reset. Just do one on the top. There's 5 on the bottom. On the top is still set. 2 loose, 3's loose. Losing my angle. 4. On the bottom. Back. There's 5 on the bottom again. That I just did. This one almost always seems to be 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom, 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom. On the top again. Let's ping pong here. My hand's cramping up. I'm just going to let off a little bit. this at for the camera. It's really cramping up my hand. How much longer I can keep going. My hand is really... Let's fire the back again. Oh, 2, and there's the open. Okay. So hopefully you can kind of see what I was doing there. Just finding one that feels to be binding, pushing down until it gives a good click. Usually you'll feel a little bit of core rotation. I know I'm not really good about talking through what I'm doing, but and then as I'm going through, I'm just testing them for that free wiggle click. If it's there, it's probably set. Hopefully that kind of explains what it is I'm doing. If my hand weren't hurting so much, I might have been less distracted and be able to talk through a little better. Maybe if there are more questions, I can do this again at another time after I've taken a bunch of Tylenol. Anyway, thanks for watching if you stayed through it, and remember, keep it legal.